Well, hi, Mark. I really appreciate you joining me here on the podcast today. And we always like to ask our guests, what was your journey into early care and education? And so, being in your profession, maybe you always worked with this industry. I don't know, but tell us a little bit about your experience.
Okay, well, I started in the insurance business in 1998
Ooh.
as kind of just a generalist, and then I bought the agency in 2003. And then through my kind of journey over the next 7 or 8 years, I kind of learned that you kind of really needed to be a specialist in something. I guess if you have a heart issue, you'd rather go see a cardiologist than your family practice attorney or a doctor. So I kind of thought I needed to do the same thing. So inside our agency, we kind of formed three niches: the rental equipment business, the franchise restaurant business, and the childcare business. And so those were three that there really weren't a lot of options out there. Not a lot of companies are looking to write childcare. So it really kind of allowed us to kind of be experts in a lot of different things. So that's kind of how we came across it, and then we've just kind of formed relationships. We're very much a relationship oriented agency. We're not looking for somebody that is looking to get a price quote every year and always looking for the cheapest quote, because the cheapest quote is not always the best quote. And so what you need is you need the insurance when you need the insurance. Everybody wants to pay as little as they possibly can, and we're all for that. But we want to pay the least you possibly can for the best possible coverage.
Yeah, and the coverage that you need, the correct coverage, I think is really important to say here because I told another colleague of mine, I said, I've never met someone in your profession, Mark, or in other vendor industries that was willing, and you're very much like this too, willing to educate your customer on here is why I'm recommending these types of policies for you. And I know, having owned my own centers back in the day, the person I worked with, set up my insurance and I never looked back. They never came to me and said, "Hey, as you're growing, might be time to look at these things." And I know you do that. So, can you tell us a little bit about, like, maybe just really high level briefly, companies mature and change. If you're just getting started in the industry and you have to have the liability coverage, could you give us a flavor of kind of what types of policies you recommend for maybe, a small single location just getting started versus kind of how that matures over time?
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, there are certain coverages that every child care, whether you're registered or whether you've got 10 kids or 500 kids, and everybody's going to need their property covered, and everyone's going to need general liability. And general liability is simply just anything that you can possibly get sued for that occurs on your premise. And then kind of a nuance that childcare has that a lot of other businesses don't have is what's called SAM coverage, which is sexual abuse and molestation.
Yeah.
So that is typically it's specifically excluded in all GL policies. So it's something that for the child care centers needs to either be added back by endorsement or by separate policy. Um, so at a minimum, and also workers' comp, if you've got more than 3M employees, and even if you're in a state that doesn't require it, we always, I mean, that's something that as a employer you absolutely need to have.
I
So
know that's I want to just stop there for a second. I love that you are sharing that because I grew up and owned my businesses in California, and when I moved to Texas, I didn't even realize this is how little I really understood insurance. I didn't realize there were states that didn't require workman's comp. In Texas, it is optional.
that's
I
correct.
have found that, primarily every business I've ever worked with here has had it, but can you talk about that a little bit? Why would a state not even, require it? I'm curious about
Good question.
that.
Because it doesn't, people what people think is since the state doesn't require it, It means that, if someone were to get hurt while doing work for you, that you would not be responsible, and that is not true. So you would just be personally responsible, or your business would be responsible for paying out that medical claim.
Wow.
And so when you're looking at the cost of medical in most states, um, the relatively low cost of workers' comp is definitely worth it. In Texas, for instance, you can probably have $1 million worth of payroll, and your workers' comp will be, $2,500.
Yeah.
So, in the whole scheme of things, I just don't understand why you would not carry workers' comp insurance. Just if nothing else, to have the headache on someone else and you not having to deal with an angry employee trying to get their bills paid.
That's a really good point too. And nothing's worse than that. I've actually had an injury that went through workman's comp. And honest to goodness, it just was better for everyone all the way around. And I was thankful that my employer had that coverage. In fact, I'd walk with a limp right now if it weren't for the fact that my company did have it. So I want to stay, back focused, but thank you for sharing that, because I think sometimes that when you're first getting into business, you're naive, you don't know. And so here you are grappling with all of these things that come at you. And, you can't be, like you said at the very beginning, you can't be an expert in everything. So you need to have a bench of qualified experts and then listen to them and continually go back and ask them for their advice and ways to help protect your business, because most of us put our whole life savings and everything about us goes into that business if you've just started, or even as you're growing and scaling. So one of the things I want to ask you specifically about, because I know you're such an expert in this, is we were talking about the fact that insurance underwriters are looking at licensing violations and saying, hey, we're going to increase your premiums because you're just not looking like a good risk. And so, for those that may not be aware of this, would you kind of give us the background? When did that start happening? Why are underwriters, kind of how do underwriters kind of play into the whole insurance world, in case someone doesn't know? Kind of take us through that.
Yeah. So these state inspections have always occurred. I mean, they're
Mhm.
always coming out twice a year typically, and just walking through your business just to be sure that, if I'm dropping my child off, I mean, that is my biggest asset. And so, they're just trying to be sure that, the facility is being kept up, and and you're basically following all the rules and regulations. What has happened in probably the last 5 years or so is underwriters are now going in and really pulling apart what the violations are, and are they repeat violations. So that's probably what they're looking at the most is, hey, if somebody comes in and let's just say you had a ratio issue where you were out of ratio, so you had too many children and not enough teachers in a classroom. And that's, it's not great, but if it happens once, they can get over that. But if they come in 6 months later and you're out of ratio again, and then 18 months later you're out of ratio again, what that's showing them is that you're just not understanding the enormity of staying within state guidelines and state ratios. And so they they feel that this is just a matter of time before a bigger issue arises and a child gets hurt because you don't have enough teachers in there, or there's some sort of abuse, um, injury, or something of that nature. So, really what they're looking for is the repeat violations. Um, but what I try to tell clients now is you just have to be more vigilant and really know what the rules are, what the state is looking for. And we try to, once again, we will educate our clients by using examples of, hey, this, we obviously won't tell them who, but we can say, hey, this one just got non-renewed, and look at these violations, because some of them really don't seem that bad on the surface. And we will hear a lot of our of clients say, "Well, they just walked in at the wrong time." Well, that's really not the right answer. The answer is, doesn't matter if they walked in at the wrong time. We should have done better. Here's what we've done to improve it. Um, we don't really like it when people try to gloss over it. I think when you make a mistake, you need to own it and learn from it, and not have the attitude, well, they just walked in and happened to see the one time we were out of ratio. If you're out of ratio one time, that's one too many.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think there is some. I just said recently to a prospective center owner and director. The director was saying, "Well, we got 60% of it right, and they're heavily penalizing us for just not making it all the way there." And I said, well, I hate to say this, but the licensing regulations are the law. They are the very foundation of what we've all agreed to do in order to keep kids safe in an education setting. So it's really pretty black and white. You either met it or you didn't meet it. And if you didn't meet it, what you want to do is go back and look at what you're doing in your operation and how can we make sure we're meeting that regulatory requirement in the future. And sounds like you're saying that same thing. It's not a matter of, they just caught us while one parent was dropping off and another parent was picking up. You should have coverage for that, right?
Right. And so we really try to educate, because accidents happen, and we always tell people it's okay to be liable. We just don't want to be negligent. And
Right.
so I think there's a big difference in that. You can talk about, and I guess one part of the of childcare that kind of drives me crazy right now is, they're out on the playground. We're within ratio. Teachers are paying attention, and a kid falls off a slide and breaks his arm.
Mhm.
Well, that could just as easily happen when they're at home or at a friend's house. Unfortunately, parents don't think about suing their neighbors when a kid has an accident. But man, they will sue a child care center in a heartbeat. And I think as a society, we just need to look, did the child care center do something wrong here that caused the injury? And if they didn't, then accidents happen, and that's kind of what's happening right now in the insurance industry as far as child care goes. Is a lot of parents are treating their kids like lottery tickets, and they're just looking to a cash in, when the child care center owners, if you're doing the right thing, um, I just don't know what we're supposed to do about 4-year-olds just having accidents. It occurs. If a child breaks their arm at home, we're not sending DFACs over there, child protective services, to take them out of the custody of the parents.
I,
So I don't understand why
yeah.
the reverse can't be true.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. We need to stop seeing the world through this lens of everyone's out to get me. I'm a victim and I deserve to be paid, right?
Yeah,
Like we have to have a standard of reasonableness, or no one would be able to afford childcare, for one thing. But I want to go back and have you define for us, because I don't even know if I know 100% from an insurance perspective the difference between being liable and negligent. And so could you give us, an example of what you would consider liable and what you see as sort of negligent?
yeah. So a very simple example would be, I put 14 kids on a bus on a field trip, and we have a car accident. And it's because I didn't stop fully at a stop sign or whatever. All right, I'm liable for that. When it goes to court and we find out that the person driving the bus has got 2 speeding tickets, now we're negligent. Now we just didn't do our due diligence. You've got 14 kids in a classroom with two teachers, and the kid falls and hurts himself. You might be liable for that. You have 14 kids and only one teacher in that classroom, so you're out of ratio. Now you're negligent. Or you didn't pull a background check on that particular teacher. Those type things are kind of what we're talking about. It's just doing what's smart. It takes, right after COVID, we got a lot of people calling and saying, hey, I'm really having trouble finding teachers. I wouldn't normally hire this person, but can I? And I always said, no, you can't. I know it's hard. But if we have to go in front of a judge or in front of a jury of our peers, can we defend that you hired this person knowing what you know?
Ooh,
Um,
first of all, I'm really pleased to hear that you have customers with such a close relationship with them, Mark, that they felt confident to call you before hiring that person. That makes me feel actually warm and toasty because that's exactly what I tell people all the time is I say, look, you've got a bench of experts all around you. Before you make a business decision, don't think you know. Go ask a bunch of experts and make sure you know, right? I mean,
yeah,
I love that. That's a great that you should have that all over your website as a testimonial. I think that is fantastic. It goes to show that you're just a warm, caring person too, which Mark, I really appreciate that. Um, would you say I'm trying to kind of understand the relationship between the role that underwriters play, right? So, what's the relationship like between you're an insurance broker, I'm assuming?
correct.
Okay. So, you're a broker, and is the underwriter part of the actual team at the insurance carrier? Can you kind of give us the lay of the land there?
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, I have the relationship with the underwriter, just like the client has the relationship with me. So, I'm kind of the go between. So, I'm selling my client to the underwriter. So, I've got to tell them why they should be willing to offer me the best price and the best product for my client.
Okay.
And so part of what we do is, not only do we have pretty standard applications that we have to send in to the underwriter along with loss information and things like that, but we'll send in a small narrative. Hey, here's a little bit about the client. They've been in business for 12 years. It's a family run business. They are a on-site owner. We'll send pictures. We'll go to their website if there's a picture of the owner with the kids. We're just trying to show them why this one is going to be better than the average, especially now. So pre-COVID, there were probably 8 or 9 insurance carriers writing childcare in the U.S. Right now, writing new childcare, there might be 3.
Wow.
And so what you've got is these 3 carriers are being extremely choosy because they can be.
Right.
They only want the best of the best. They want somebody with no claims, with no violations, with no, um, you know, uh, so anyway, it's just made it very difficult for us on how we sell each of our clients to them. Now, the fact that we write so many, we do have a little bit of a better relationship with some of these carriers than the people that are writing 7, 8, 9 of these things. I mean, we probably write, I don't know, 400 centers, maybe 450 centers
Yeah.
all over the country. So there are several companies that are no longer writing new business, but they are remaining on stuff that they're currently writing as long as they've had no violations and no claims and things of that nature. So kind of where we are now is if companies are offering a renewal, we really need to take it. Uh,
Yeah. Now, okay, so that's a really good point. Gosh, I just have so many questions for you. I don't know where to go next. So before we go into renewals, if I were a if I were a newer, like let's take me as a person. I had run my own centers and was in childcare for years. Let's say I decided to purchase a childcare center and wanted to get my insurance and I wanted to make myself as appealing as possible to for you, like offer you as much data and as much documentation, let's say, to help win over that underwriter is seeing me as a potential good risk. what are some of the things you would want to include in that narrative?
So is a brand new, if you're buying a center, getting one of the what we would call the standard carriers to write you is almost impossible. I'd put it at less than 5%.
Wow.
Um, so in those scenarios, you would have to go to what's called the excess and surplus lines market, which is going to be higher rates and less coverage,
Hmm.
until you can build about a 3 year. Sometimes we get it done after two, but you really need to build kind of a 3 year a ramp there of experience.
Well, a track
Um,
record,
yeah,
right? I don't
correct.
blame them, right?
And so even if we go back and say, well, they owned a child care center 10 years ago, they still won't. We're even having difficulties when an experienced child care owner comes in and buys another child care center. We're still having issues getting those uh, underwritten as anything other than new business.
Wow.
Um, but in those scenarios, I mean, typically, I mean, we're looking for owner and director resumes. What did you do? Why are you qualified to do this? Unfortunately, there's a lot of people buying child care centers that, work for IBM or, this is kind of a second job for them.
Yeah.
And so, underwriters are looking for somebody that this is their primary job, and that they have experience understanding how to run a child care center, because it is different than running almost anything else.
I agree.
I mean, I mean, I mean, you're dealing with 6-month-old to 5-year old children.
Hmm.
Um, you're dealing with a bunch of teachers that can get frustrated, and can get overwhelmed, and and how do you diffuse those situations? Um, so I mean, that's kind of important on the new business. On the renewal business, I mean, it's just, if you've had a claim, the biggest thing is, how did you handle it? What did you do? You know, we had a bunch that happened in 2021, the big freeze in Texas,
Yep.
and so there were several schools that would just come in and, hey, we just fixed the pipes and now we're done. So there's not a lot that we can do with that, but we had other schools that said, all right, we wrapped the pipes up in the attic with extra insulation. We put heaters up there. We put there was some sort of heat sensors on the pipes that can kind of give us a warning of when it's going off. So those people, we were able to say, hey, here's what, yes, the insurance company paid out $500,000, but here's what they've done that they paid out of their pocket to prevent this from occurring again.
So proactive, preventative measures that might protect against a claim of any kind, right? So weatherizing your facility, upgrades to your facility that are connected with safety, like, pinch guards and I don't know, I can't come up with another
Yeah.
example. You probably
Well,
see a lot of
you
them, but
know, there's all kinds. There's do you have a plumber come out twice a year and check out your hot water heaters so that they can stop
okay.
those before they burst? Do you have an HVAC contractor that comes out and checks on your HVAC units? Because what ends up happening is, your HVAC unit never goes out in January. It goes
No,
out in the middle, in the middle of July.
100% true.
Um, and so, and the hot water heater never bursts during the school day when you're there. It bursts at 2 o'clock in the morning when no one's there to shut it off. So what are you doing to prevent those type things from occurring? And so the more we can show the insurance company, hey, here's my semi-annual inspection from the plumber and electrician and HVAC guy, to know that this is what we're doing to stay a step ahead, just makes you look better to underwriting.
Okay, that makes really good sense. Let me ask you this. Um, Knowing that the licensing regulations, violations, and citations happen, but I am of this notion. You tell me if I'm right or wrong. But let's say, for example, that I run a really high quality early education program, And I've now started tracking and documenting our compliance in preparation for my licensing reviews. So, for example, there is a regulation that we have to make sure that the cots and cribs are spaced 18 inches apart. So let's say that every day when my staff moves the cots and cribs, out for nap time, they measure them, they take a picture, they document date and time stamp and a signature that they've done that. So they have a document trail showing that they are meeting the requirement. And let's say, licensing comes in at some point and says, oh, this one crib is too close to the other. But I've got a document trail demonstrating I've been proactive about this. Would that documentation help me when I approach my underwriter during renewal?
Absolutely. So, um, I tell people the three best words in insurance are document, document, document. The more documentation we have, I mean, let's say you're doing quarterly safety meetings
Yeah.
and you have everybody sign that they were there, and then all of a sudden there is an injury, and you can show, hey, we trained Cindy on this. She wrote that she got the training here. Here it is in August. Here it is in October. So she's had the training. Once again, it shows that accidents happen. What the attorneys are going to argue is that you, Mr. Owner or Mrs. Owner, you didn't properly train the employee, which is why this injury happened. We can show, yes, we did train them. And once again, this goes between liable and negligent. Here's where we trained them. Here's where they signed off that they received the training. Accidents just occur sometimes. You can do all of the right things, and things can still happen. I mean, you can drive down the road and never go above the speed limit and still have a car accident.
That's
I
right. That's
mean, it
right.
just happens.
That's right. And
Um,
and with children, it happens every day because they're just learning to walk. They're just learning about their environment. And as much as we would like to, keep our eyes on them at every single moment, I know for myself as a mother and as a grandmother, and even when I was in childcare, it was very important to me to keep children safe. I'll run across an entire playground if I see a child I don't know that looks like they're going to
yeah,
get hurt, right? And I
yeah.
bet you
Oh
would
yeah.
too, right?
Um,
So, but there's just, you can't bubble wrap them, right? So accidents are going to happen in these scenarios. But I do think that documentation, like the example you just gave, if you're doing safety meetings on a regular basis, I would probably proactively tell the listeners, don't just have a little roster with names signed off that they were there for an hour. I would put in some details about what did you train on? How did each person actually understand the training? What can you do to really make that a fully documented process? Um,
Absolutely. I mean,
Documenting your drills, documenting your inspections of your vehicles, proactive maintenance on the vehicles. Let's turn a little bit to behaviors for a second. Are there things that you could share without betraying any clients? Because I'm going to assume that with this depth of experience that you have, that you've seen a lot of claims. And actually, I want to back up and ask two different questions first. One is, we all have insurance because we know things can happen, right? And we want to protect our assets. We want to protect, ourselves, whether you're at home or even owning a business. It's almost gotten to the point though where you're afraid to use your insurance and actually have a claim. Can you talk about when we should put in a claim and when it might be just better to pay it out of our own pocket?
yeah. So I think what kind of happened over the years is people got used to insurance being more of a maintenance policy.
Mhm.
Hey, any little thing that goes wrong, this is what I pay premiums for. And so they got in to where they were turning in, $1,000, $1,500 claims. And you just really cannot do that anymore. So we've kind of told most of our clients, if it's going to be under $10,000, you need to have the way to pay that on your own.
Yeah.
The problem that you're going to run into is when you get into liability claims. That's easy on a property claim.
Right.
Hey, I had a little flood or my hot water heater busted. That's an easy one to do, but you never really know what a liability claim could turn into.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so that's typically where we'll just have to kind of talk it through. because on a legal basis, if you go and you pay, you will pay somebody $5,000 and then they still turn around and sue you, the insurance company can argue that you have taken on that liability. You claimed liability, therefore they're off the hook.
Yeah.
And so you really need to be careful before you go off and just pay some sort of liability claim, that you've done it in a way, that we're getting waivers signed, those type things. Um, but yeah, I mean, basically, if it's under 10, you just really need to be prepared to pay it.
So have a
Every
little
time.
nest egg or a little, what you call that, the equity line of credit that you can get if you need it to pay off something that happened in your facility, for example. If you're not sure, here's another question I have. See, I am so full of questions for you. Here's another question I have. Sometimes we're almost afraid to call our insurance agent and find out whether we should turn in a claim or not. Can you give us an example of when you can't call me and ask for my advice?
You can. I should be your first phone call every single. Your insurance should be your first phone call every single time.
Good.
I mean, why people would be afraid to call their insurance broker is beyond me. One, we're going to know what your insurance typically covers and does not cover. Um, that's number one. Two, we've seen them all. I mean, if you can bring me a claim I haven't seen yet, I'll shake your hand. But we've kind of seen it all, and so you know, we are here to be your advisor, and we will advise you the best of our ability. But we should be, I'll be amazed that I'll get a phone call and I'm like, well, this claim happened 3 weeks ago. I'm like, well, why are you just calling me? All right, well, I've already done this and this and this, and they're so proud of themselves. I'm like, you've done all the wrong things. You've
Oh,
literally, you've literally painted us into a corner now that we can't get out of. I wish you had called me 3 weeks ago,
yeah.
because then we can very proactively, whether it's talk to the parent or um, look at the videotape, and you would be amazed how often. I know a lot of people don't like, they're like, well, I don't like cameras in there. It just hurts me. Video helps us 98% of the time.
Ooh, say that again, Mark. I think that's really an important statistic. So 98% of the time, it actually protects them.
So you would be amazed how many attorney letters that we get that say, your client slammed my kid down on their nap mat, blah blah, this, that, and the other, and then we go look at the video. We send the video to the attorney, and he drops the client because they look at it, and that is not what occurred at all. And so their easy payday is done. Now they're going to have to fight this because it's not as clear cut as they had thought. So they'll just drop the client. And to be quite honest, if we did slam the kid down, we need to know that on the front end, because if you don't have video, it's their word against ours, and guess who wins? The child, every time.
Yeah. Well, of course,
So
and rightly so, right? So
absolutely.
I
So
think I think you're right. I think over the years I went from, I was one of those that probably back in the day wouldn't have had cameras in my classrooms, but after meeting some of the vendors that I know personally now, I've definitely been persuaded.
yeah, no, I'm a big proponent, and I'm a big proponent if, hey, something happens in a classroom, no matter how minor, whether it's to a child or to an employee, typically most of the videos you can have them rewrite themselves every 30 days. I think is the longest that they'll go. So one, I would have it set on as long as your provider will let you hang on to that video. I would.
That's a really good call out, really good, because
Um,
I wouldn't want it overwritten and then,
yeah.
something happens and you try to go back and look at the videotape and there's no videotape there to protect you.
Correct. And
Yeah.
then number two, I would say, because a lot of times an attorney or an employee might wait 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and then file something. So if there's an incident that happens in the school, even if the parent comes to you and everything's fine, I would still burn, an hour before and an hour after wherever the incident is. I'd put it on a thumb drive and I'd stick it in that child's file, just to have, so that if all of a sudden, 3 or 6 months from now, when it is overwritten, because now once again it's your word against theirs.
Yeah, so
Um,
really what you're advocating for is just like we do, with other documents or whatever, get yourself a backup copy. So use whatever system is out there, but then maybe every 30 days, download that video and offload it somewhere so that you have it just in case.
yeah. Well, I would just if there's a known incident, if you know that a child bumped his head, and even if you don't think it's a big deal, just go and burn an hour before, an hour after, and just stick it in the child's file just in case a employee trips and falls and says, "Hey, they're fine." Just burn it, just
Yeah.
so you have it, so that if it comes back, at some later time, you do have. Here's the video. Here's exactly what occurred. So there is no he said, she said.
Yeah, yeah. Really good advice, Mark. So, let me ask you this. One of the things that we've been doing is doing a deep dive study of licensing violations. And to be honest with you, it was kind of shocking to me at first. When I first started doing it, I was thinking to myself, wow, it doesn't matter if you're the most premier, large, well known brand in the nation or one of the top 10, we know who those folks are. Or if you're just a little mom and pop shop down the road, these license citations and violations are happening. So there are cracks in the very foundation of the industry. And I have a two-part question for you. One is I did see quite a bit of notable, and you could call it a couple of different things. It's staff not knowing how to help guide children in their behavior. And so it can be filed as a complaint. It can become, an incident of child abuse or neglect. It could be a whole lot of different things, and it's a wide gamut, right? It's a spectrum. What kinds of examples could you share with our audience that do tend to get from license violation and us having to do training with a staff member, and what might be leading indicators that something much more serious is going on in that classroom?
So typically, when we look at these license things, what we see a lot of is supervision, and that's typically, I think, kind of what you're talking about.
Mhm.
And so we actually have it's a pretty good, it's about a 2 or 3 page questionnaire that we've given to a lot of our clients and said, just have your teachers fill this out. And it's, you know, little Johnny won't go nap. Excuse me, will not go down for his nap. He's being cranky. What do you do? And there's about 10 to 20 of those type questions. And if you have your teachers fill that out, you would be amazed at sometimes how misinformed or what their reactions are, or what they think they're supposed to be doing. And so what that does is gives you great training to say, hey, you know, Cindy really believes that the right way to do this is to just leave them alone and let them just kind of cry themselves out eventually. And so we use these questionnaires, or owners, we have our owners use these questionnaires to really see maybe where they missed the boat on some of their training.
Yeah.
And we've even used this as a sending to an insurance company saying, hey, here's what the employees said. Look how bad this was. And then I want you to look at this training exercise that was done and look at the answers after we did the training exercise.
Wow.
How much better those are. So it even shows, look, we did this before we had a problem.
That's
Um,
good. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I can see
so,
where that would put an insurance underwriter's mind at ease,
yeah.
because here's what I thought just in my natural state. After being educated, now I have tools, I have resources in my tool belt. Here's now what's happening. I think that's a beautiful thing. Um, So, final question for you. I could talk to you all day, Mark. We'll have to have you back more often, or maybe do some materials together, some co-branded materials together, or something. One of the things that I've been kind of pondering myself. You said earlier that there are only really three carriers left in the nation willing to even insure this industry. And I suspect it is for a variety of reasons. One is, these large liability claims happen where something terrible happens, and now the insurance carrier has to pay out. And, after a while, insurance carriers go, I'm just not going to insure these
Cool.
folks because it's just too risky for me. So, what do you think as an industry as a whole we could do to shift that lens so that maybe we could attract some insurance carriers back to sticking a toe in this market?
Yeah. That's the million dollar question. I think in hindsight, when you look back, forever the child care insurance was probably written a little too cheaply. You look at sexual abuse and molestation coverage, and there were carriers selling that for $1 million worth of coverage for $3,500.
Oh, yeah.
So that probably was just not priced correctly. And so I think what has happened over the years is just the as the litigation has turned as bad as it's turned. Um, we haven't been able to keep up with pricing as quickly as maybe we would like. You've got to file rates in states in order to, so I mean, basically, if I want to change my rate in the state of Texas, these insurance companies have to go in and file these rates with the estate. Well, the states can't get these rate increases through fast enough. So what's happened is these insurance companies are saying, well, until we can get this rate passed, we just can't write anymore because we're not filed to charge what we believe is a fair rate
Oh,
uh, for us. So I think you'll see here in the next year or two some of these rate changes get through. I think as these rates have increased the way that they have, you've seen childcare owners understand how important it is to do the right thing all the time, to uh, you know to get the rules and regs right, to get the right people in place, to pay people a little bit more money to get the right people in place. I tell people all the time, you can hire somebody and save a couple bucks on their salary, but if you spend a couple extra bucks and get the right people in that are leaders and not just followers, that are willing to kind of think outside the box and willing to go the extra mile, you'll end up saving money in the long term. And I think it is as insurance has probably doubled or at least doubled, maybe even tripled here in the last 5 years from pre-COVID. I think you're definitely seeing a shift in we need to do more we need to hire the right people rather than just trying to kind of put butts in seats, if that makes sense.
it totally does. And I would just add to that, don't look for just someone, a butt to get in the seat, right, at a low cost wage. What you're looking for is a young person with a lot of energy that's looking for a career path, someone that wants to be in the industry longer than they might want to work at McDonald's or a movie theater or someplace else where they might find a comparable wage, right? I would increase that salary just like you're recommending, but I would also say you have to show them that this is actually a pathway to something else, right? And I think we need to continue as an industry to make sure that the public is aware that this is where education begins. And the innovation that I have seen in the private sector of early care and education over the last 30 years I've worked alongside them far exceeds what we're doing in public education. So I'm a very vocal advocate for private childcare and early care and education. I think the public schools do a wonderful job. I'm not demeaning that at all, but I think they have their own work cut out for them. So I agree with you. And I think we need to help young people see that educating these 0 to 5 year olds actually offers them a way to impact the world much more so than some of the other roles they might play elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also think it's important when you're interviewing potential candidates. Do they like kids? You'd
Right.
be amazed
First and
that
foremost,
people
like
are like,
young people.
no, I hate kids. Well, then why do you want to work here? And they're like, well, I'm just looking for a job. Well, I mean, that's not who we're looking for. I
Right.
mean, if you don't love kids, I mean, you really have to love what you do. I mean, to be in a room full of 10, 12, 14 kids that are rambunctious and that are, you really need to love what you do.
You really do.
And
You
yeah, and
really
I've
do.
got a great respect for all these workers that are in there doing it, and for 8 to 10 hours a day. They've got more patience than I have.
Yeah, sometimes I think we as vendors kind of put them on a pedestal like they're saints, and in a lot of ways they really are. It's more of a calling to
Yeah,
work with
absolutely.
young children than it is a profession. So, Mark, it's been such a pleasure, and I really hope to get to interact with you more often. I think everything that you shared here today is so important. Um, can you share with us, this is, and I'm so sorry I didn't get this to you ahead of time to prepare you, but I always like to ask, do you have a favorite quote or mantra or something that stuck with you through your career that just, it inspires you, something you'd share with young business owners?
Um, you know, Not really. My kids will say that. I guess what I've always told them is, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And so I think that's where, at least in my career, you can't always try the same thing. Sometimes you got to try to think outside the box if something's not working. And so, one of the things that we're looking at in this childcare space now is, kind of doing our own captive, our own kind of insurance company, just until everyone kind of comes back to the market.
Oh, I think that's
So,
wonderful.
yeah, so just be willing to try new things. If one thing's not working, you know, stop trying to, put a, round peg in a square hole. It's okay to admit you were wrong and pivot to something else.
I 100% agree with you. And I think that's a perfect quote in today's world, right? You have to be flexible, be willing to pivot. I always say, fail as fast as you can. It really doesn't matter that you failed. Fail
Yeah.
fast. It's really much more important how quickly you can recover. So, thanks so much for being here, Mark.